Good evening, and welcome to the Monday, October 15th Council Committee Work Session Special Meeting. This evening, we are going to be spending time with ID 0332, Citywide Strategic Plan, discussion on goals and objectives, and to lead us off on that conversation will be David Fujimoto, our Sustainability Director.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for joining us for this early work session in advance of the council meeting tonight. We definitely appreciate your time. Tonight we're here to take our primary focus is to take a look at the goals and objectives that have been drafted as a part of the strategic planning process. This will be the second time that they've come forward before council. The last occasion was on September 24th at the work session, at which point in time we took some feedback. We've also since then put out a survey out to the community to receive some feedback from the community, have had some work groups, some staff work groups take that feedback, make some adjustments, and the administration's made some adjustments as well. So we're hopeful that tonight we'll be able to work through the goals and objectives. Our objective for this evening is to hopefully work our way through and get a nod of approval and endorsement to be able to proceed to the next phase of work. This kind of place and time allows us to go forward and start to flesh out the actions and performance measures as a part of the next phase. A couple of points of note. Included with the council packet and also copies at your spots are two large 11 by 17 printouts. There's one that's entitled Draft Goals and Objectives V1. That was the original document. You can see that it has kind of a red bar at the top. So that was the first version that was shown at the September 24th date. And then the version 2, the V2, has yellow towards the top. And that's the draft that we'll be considering and looking at this evening. To help guide us through this process, Brian Scott is here to provide a little more context and to help facilitate the conversation. Yes.
So I just want to reiterate or maybe restate. So basically, the hope is that we're going to get consensus on the language that's basically on page 4 of the packet, which is this V2 spreadsheet.
That's
right?
correct. Thank you very much.
So it's sort of a speak now or forever hold our peace as far as that goes.
In terms of endorsement at this phase, when we understand this will all be put together into a final package with a final strategic plan, which council will then adopt, which we're hoping it will be in 2019.
Okay. Does anybody have any high-level questions before we bring Brian in? Chris?
Just one, and it's the one I'll always ask you whenever we talk about this. If you can, as we walk through this, if you could spend a little bit of time talking about how we use this and how it becomes actualized and how this fantastic tool that is the strategic plan helps to shape where we're going, that would be very helpful for me.
Yes, I'd be happy to. And we'll also talk about this as we go forward. Our plan is if we proceed tonight with the endorsement of the goals and objectives, our next session would be focused on actions and performance measures. And we also want to start to get into a little bit more of a detailed conversation on how do we actually put the plan into implementation. So we'll develop a plan, but as we all know, unless we have a framework for implementation of the plan, it really has no meaning or purpose. So that will entail a conversation such as prioritization of projects as they're coming forward in any given work program and budget year, linkages to things like our annual budgeting process or our future two-year budgeting process if we start to go that direction, things like our capital improvement planning, work plan development, a whole variety of things that we'll start to look at. We also, in the last year, laid out a different process for retreat and planning with council, and so that would also be a consideration as well. So there's a number of places in which we'd want to incorporate this body of work so that we can move it forward and start to work on the actions that are included.
Thanks, David. Any other questions from other council members before we move on? I see none.
Great.
Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you, sir. My name is Brian Scott with BDS Planning and Urban Design. We've been facilitating the strategic planning process and will continue doing so. As David said, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to see if we got it right in responding to your feedback about the earlier draft of the goals and objectives. And so specifically, basically, as simple as that, we want to be okay on the goals and objectives and then discuss next steps a little bit. In response to the earlier question, one of the key things about strategic planning is how's the implementation going to work? And when you have a kind of comprehensive set of goals and objectives, it's like, where are the priorities? And I know in conversations with many of you, you've been sort of waiting for where do the priorities come in. And I would suggest that the really good place for the priorities is in the annual work planning that you go forward, because things will evolve over time. And so trying to identify those specific priorities compared to your longer-term strategic objectives is a really good place for that, and not trying to build all that prioritization sort of rigidly into the plan, because those things will evolve over time, would be my suggestion about moving that forward. Redrafting the goals and objectives, Gabriel and I were here 3 weeks ago. He's sorry not to be here today, but probably not real sorry. He's in New Mexico on vacation. But he was sorry to have to miss tonight's meeting. After your last meeting 3 weeks ago, you gave us some really good feedback in the meeting, and then either he or I spoke with each of you on the telephone in the ensuing couple of weeks to get your individual feedback, sort of thoughts on the planning process, and then we aggregated those thoughts and shared them with the city staff, and the city staff convened a couple of work groups to kind of respond to that feedback and help craft the language that's right here. At the highest level, I want to say that the draft that's before you, I think, is very strong. I think it responds to what the city council said. I think the staff is okay with it, and they worked really hard on preparing the draft that came to you 3 weeks ago, and were really interested in those modifications. And I think it is very strongly an outcome of the community input you've had through the process so far. And in your packet, you got a memo from Gabriel and I that kind of outlines our thinking on that and how the community process feeds into this memo. I'm not going to go into that in any detail tonight, because you all got it ahead of time. But if I had to summarize kind of the input, the conversations that we had individually, as a group, you think the process has gone pretty well so far, and you feel good about where we are in the process, and largely think that we're on the right track. Every one of you had some specific edits that you had thoughts about. Sometimes those were real compatible. Occasionally those were kind of going in different directions, so we were trying to sort that out, but most of you had specific suggestions. And it was very clear to me that a lot of you are sort of, where are the priorities? When do we get to the priorities? When do we make the hard choices about what is there? And my recommendation would be that those hard choices come as you're setting annual priorities in the work plans ahead. You'll get more information as we are back with you in a couple of months about actions and performance measures. That helps flesh it out a little more fully. But the real place that priorities happen is in the budgeting that happens every year, and additional things will happen. And then we're looking forward to the discussion of the actions and the performance measures. The other thing several of you asked for was, what's the relationship between the community input we've had so far and these goals and objectives as drafted? And in our memo, we kind of walked through that in detail, sort of how the things that are in this come from that feedback. And I felt really good as Gabriel pulled those pieces together, and sort of how that sort of shows that there's a pretty great, the community feedback flows into these very well. As a reminder, we did a community-wide online survey with more than 1,000 responses, which is great compared to other communities. We had many focus groups led by the consultants, by city staff, and by community members. We did a number of community pop-up meetings at other events where people could give us input in the strategic plan. And we did a very well attended strategic plan charrette with more than 70 people coming and participating through several hours into this process. And then in the last few weeks, City staff has been using peak democracy to put all this out and gain community input through this process, and we've been sharing that as it came in. So I think a lot of process went into this. Pretty strong recommendation that this works overall. So just giving you a quick sort of high-level view of where the goals and objectives stand. We have 6 goals, one in each of the priority areas that you approved several months ago: mobility, growth and development, environmental stewardship, social and economic vitality, core infrastructure, city leadership and services. Mobility has 5 objectives: a funding strategy for mobility, an adopted plan for mobility, connections and efficiencies, light rail integration, and regional traffic mitigation. Growth and development has 3 objectives: protecting charm and character, community engagement, amenities and services. Environmental stewardship has objectives related to planning, city policies and practices, community stewardship, and strategic acquisitions. Social and economic vitality has objectives related to living wage jobs, affordable housing, targeted services, business retention and expansion. Core infrastructure gets into operation and maintenance and planning for the future. And city leadership and services is about civic engagement, staff capacity, equitable and welcoming, and public resource stewardship.
Ryan, sorry, can you go back and, forgive me, maybe I missed it a little bit. Just revisit the relationship between the actions and performance measure activity that's going to be occurring going forward and the budget. Because it seems like there could potentially be actions and performance measure work by staff that could need money.
Work being done by staff as a follow-up to this meeting will be fleshing out each of these objectives in terms of what are the actions that we need to take and what are the performance measures to know if we're getting there. So that's the next step, and we'll be back with you in December. Assuming we come out of tonight with a recommendation, we'll be back to you in December with actions and performance measures. Certainly, some of the actions will require resources, and I don't think at the strategic plan level we identify which resources in which year, but as we move into the next budget year, we do start applying specific budgets to which actions, which is right when the council gets right into what are the priorities. That if you think that the third mobility objective is the main thing and it needs X, Y, Z resources, then you better put it in the budget or it's not going to get that attention.
So does that mean that these are going to be for rollout in 2020 and in 2019 we're going to budget them, or are we going to try to do anything in 2019? Administrator Moon?
No, the preliminary budget that has been proposed by the mayor that's going to be introduced tonight doesn't assume any particular strategic priorities or action items from this work. And so we'll try to incorporate all of that into 2020 budget or subsequent years, since it's a 5-year plan.
Got it. Oh, yeah, I realize it's not going to all occur in 2020. I just want to make sure I understood the expectation that we're really likely to not start doing the specific actions and performance measures that are going to rise out of this process probably really until 2020, because they require the 2019 budget activities.
Sure, although I think that's accurate, except that I think there are places where we have already identified actions that are either being undertaken this year or will be in 2019. And so we'll be able to point those out as we march forward with budget.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, ready? Okay, so moving into, I just want to present to you the suggested goals and objectives for your concurrence, or if we need to make edits, this would be the time. Remind you that a lot of process going into this. I think these are responsive to your collective feedback, as well as a lot of staff work and the community's input. You can see quite clearly on these slides, as well as in the memo that we provided ahead of the meeting, where we have edited what you were looking at last time. Mobility, the goal, staying the same. Getting around town is easier for people who live, work, and play here. Objectives related to a fundable, funding strategy is in place to plan, build, and maintain a connected mobility system. There's an adopted plan for an intuitive, integrated, and innovative multimodal mobility system. There are improvements to the mobility system, provide connections and increase efficiencies. The location and vision for the light rail integration in Issaquah is established. And one added objective, programs and partnerships are developed and expanded to minimize the negative impacts of regional traffic to Issaquah. And I think both of those edits, taking out the extra words for all modes, which I think folks thought was obvious, and the last objective, making sure that we were not only talking about local traffic, but we were talking about the impact of regional traffic.
Any questions, comments, thoughts? Councilmember Hunt?
On the goal, the word easier, I know there was some discussion previously, but I wonder if our goal will always be to make it always easier than the current situation, or if there's a goal that would be to make it efficient, or if some other word there.
So you could say it is easy for people to get around, for people who live, work, and play here. But my sense is that Issaquah's strategic goal at the moment is to make it easier. You know, I think that's what Issaquah wants, and I could imagine a future goal where you think it's okay and you just don't want it to get any worse, but I don't think that's what Issaquah thinks right now.
Any other comments? Councilmember Ray?
I agree with Councilmember Hunt. I still am uncomfortable with easier because I don't know what is easier than, because it's a comparative, and I'd like the goal to be more declarative than comparative.
Okay?
That's me, I don't care. I mean, I think, wordsmithing, but number 3, when we say efficiencies, I'm not sure what that word efficiencies means. Improvements to the mobility system provide connections, get that, and increase efficiencies. Do we provide just some context of what we're trying to get to there with efficiencies?
I think as originally drafted, the staff who drafted that were trying to say that it would work, that the system works well for all modes. In your last meeting, you said maybe we don't need for all modes, because that's kind of goes without saying, I think is my understanding of that edit. But we would still want the system to be efficient.
Okay.
All right.
Moving forward then.
David?
I can provide some additional clarity there if helpful. So part of that was the efficiencies are about the movement and flow of various modes of travel. So that's what that's getting to. It's not saying that it's going to eliminate traffic, for example, but might help it to move more efficiently through town. And the striking of the for all modes is, I think, also a reflection to some community comments that we received that spoke about the need to, and expectation, I think, of prioritization, that it perhaps might not be reasonable to have improvements for all of the modes, but that some additional conversation would be required further down the road about where do you put your resources.
I thought your word flow really added a lot to that statement. I don't know if we can weave that in there someplace, but that's what we're looking for, is a more efficient flow.
So improvements to the mobility system provide connections and increase
Or a more efficient flow.
Improvements to the mobility system provide connections and a more efficient flow.
Or flow efficiencies?
I think the word flow is, I was looking for efficiency of what, and efficiency of flow helps me.
Thoughts on that? Councilmember Winterstein, you look like you want to say something. Not.
I'm satisfied with the way it is. I understand efficiency. You're getting the same amount of work done or events accomplished with less energy and less disruption, or you're getting more done with the same amount. Then that's what we're trying to do, is this system people have to be able to get around with less disruption, less delay, less energy. We're making it more efficient. And I think that's well said.
So I was trying to think of how somebody could read it if they didn't have the word flow efficiencies. And the thing I was thinking about was financial efficiency, right? So by saying flow efficiency, or efficiencies of flow, or whatever, however we would say it, right? We would specifically be making it clear that it's about many people in this world, they hear efficiency and they think, financial efficiency or economic efficiency, right? And this would clarify that, but other thoughts? Councilmember Goodman.
I agree with adding something along with efficiencies. I think flow works. I think I agree with Chris that we need to speak to what that means, so we're not all guessing.
Thank you. Council Deputy President Batiste.
I would just say, I agree with flow. I guess my question would be, if we're going to add the word flow in terms of efficiencies, is that enough? And are we only talking about efficiency in terms of flow? Or once we start to define, then I'm wondering, we add the word flow, is there something else that we're missing? Or are we only talking about efficiency with flow?
You have something in
It's just a
mind?
question that I'm throwing out there. That was just my thought. I like flow, but now I'm wondering, are we okay with just adding flow and stopping there? I don't have a recommendation.
Councilmember Goodman.
Can we maybe get some insight on what the conversations have been? Like, what was the intent of the increased efficiencies?
Sure. So I think that they could take many forms. It could be improvements in, could be spot improvements that help to increase time throughput, if you will, or it could be measures that would help provide better connections. So it could be, it kind of is maybe not just flow, but it's efficiencies in a variety of forms. It could be cars per hour, for example, not necessarily speed or time. But I think it was trying to capture a number of different elements. The other point I would say is that some of these will also become clearer as some of the objectives or the actions are laid out, and so they'll provide some more shape and form and specificity to some of these. They are intended to be kind of a little bit higher level outcome oriented. The actions will be the kind of pieces that will change over time in order to achieve those objectives.
So is it to create a more efficient system overall? Including, it would include flow and,
So I think, so this specific objective in this kind of combination of objectives was more intended to talk about some of the specific projects that could happen in the near term. So the funding strategy, the kind of planning for the adopted plan, the light rail, those are all measures that will take place over some amount of time, but don't specifically cause any direct action in the community in terms of traffic or connectivity of trails and sidewalks and things like that. And so there are a number of things that the city can do here and now in order to improve those connections and efficiency. And so this one's really more focused on things that can be done. It's here as a piece to help ensure that there are more actionable measures in the short term and not just planning functions. And similarly, number 5 was identified specifically because a lot of feedback that we've heard from the community is really wanting to address this notion of regional traffic and its impacts to the community. And so that was a new addition as well.
Councilmember Ramos.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to get to is just, it's almost restating efficiencies to the mobility system, which is the start of the sentence, because it's the whole thing we're trying to make efficient. To me, that includes parking. It's not just flow. I mean, those things all add into the mobility system, so if you flow, it's not quite getting it all. So I don't know if you want to get to, it's kind of repeating it, but increase efficiencies, you got up there, a more efficient system overall, because that includes all different aspects, flow being a major one, obviously. I'm okay anyway.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
Yeah, we're kind of getting into definite wordsmithing here, but I would feel comfortable with the overall improvements to the overall mobility system, providing connections and increasing efficiency flow. Is that, Councilmember Ray, did you want efficiency flow?
I'm going to actually respond to what Councilmember Ramos just said, which is, if I unravel that sentence a bit, and maybe it's just going to diagramming my sentences back to 4th grade, but it's really what we're talking about is we want to improve connections and efficiencies in the mobility system. So I just, I don't want to get balled up in this because I think, to David's point, this is really about getting us to the initiatives we want to launch, and spending a lot of time on, is it flow and parking, is it whatever, is probably not serving us very well.
Okay, so I guess what I'm going to say, I'm going to ask council. I mean, the purpose of this, as we were discussing a little bit earlier, is that staff is going to go start working, what are the actions and performance measures to accomplish this? And if we feel that it, as written, or with this, perhaps with the word flow in some capacity, is sufficient to give staff the guidance to start working actions and performance measures that we support, then I would suggest minimal changes and letting it move forward. And because it would only be if we think there's a possibility of heading down a path that is going to lead to actions and performance measures that aren't what we want, that I think we want to potentially take some action here. City Administrator Moon?
I just want to chime in and say, yes, that's exactly what we're looking for. This sort of feedback and dialogue helps us to understand maybe what's desired at that next level. And so each time we have these conversations, we try to fine tune and get to where you want it to be. So as I hear language around, is it parking, is it flow, is it predictability, et cetera, we can then begin thinking about what actions to tuck under each of these. And there again, you'll have an opportunity to make sure that we're aligning with where you want the plan to take us.
Got it. Okay. Sorry, Councilmember Ramos?
The sentence he wrote up there, flipped it around, it might make more sense. Same words, just
Just turning around to say improve connections and efficiencies or flow efficiencies in the mobility system.
Is everyone okay with that language?
You want flow in there or not? No. I see heads shaking.
It looks like nobody is queuing up
So
for the thought. So thank you for.
Well, I'm going to.
we like this one better.
I think I'm not hearing any Councilmember Goodman.
I'm going to reserve comment for later because
Okay.
I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure it's exactly what we want to say. It also wouldn't be, it's supposed to be, anyway, I'll think about it. It's
All right.
not.
Thank you. All right. Sounds like we can move forward. Councilmember Winterstein?
Comment about number 5? Or are you ready to go on for that?
Sounds like we're ready. We move on for now, reserving the right to visit.
It's easy to understand the intent, however, and maybe it doesn't need to be specified at this level per the conversation we just had. I sat on southbound East Lake Sammamish at the light right at I-90, just above, north of I-90 yesterday, and watched about 25 cars come off westbound I-90, turn south onto Front Street, and all go into the right lane and presumably go down and turn right onto Gilman. They weren't pass-through. They were probably coming to use our retail. They were all regional traffic. Do we mean all regional traffic? And maybe we don't have to say it here. Or were we talking about pass-through, drive-through regional traffic?
Just from my observation, this says negative impacts, and if they were coming to spend money in Issaquah, that'd be a positive impact, right?
Generally, the conversation, my perception has been around the negative impacts of pass-through traffic, of those, as opposed to, like I observed. I'm sure I bet you those cars went to Target, for example. And I don't think that's probably the intent, and maybe you guys can carry it lower, as you go to the next phase, but that's my reaction, my thoughts about number 5.
You're just saying if we added pass-through to it, that would clear that up.
If indeed that's the intent, that's what I assume it is.
That's what I assumed.
Other thoughts? Councilmember Goodman?
Well, I'm not sure I heard all right. Are you thinking we would add pass-through in there somewhere, regional pass-through traffic? Because, and the reason I'm asking is because I would agree with you that if there are, the positive impacts of having regional traffic come to Issaquah and spend money, to the extent that there are negatives about that, we would want to address that, so, such as in traffic flow. So maybe there's something that we could do to minimize negative traffic impacts of that. So I think if we put pass-through, then I think it sends the message that the only issue that we want to address is if somebody starts at one end of Issaquah and goes all the way through to the other. But there might be some things that we could do to help circulation when some of the regional traffic is here shopping. That's why I'm asking the question.
I actually didn't propose a language change. I didn't intend to, because I do respect kind of what I think the framework we're working within here. The way this reads, it could, I gave an example of regional traffic that wasn't passed through, and it was more of a question of, are we trying to embrace all of them types of regional traffic, even those that come from Snoqualmie and they want to shop somewhere at a retail area, or is the emphasis on pass-through? I think the emphasis should be on pass-through, but that's not at the exclusion of other efficiencies, which I think would be captured elsewhere in our objectives.
Yeah, I mean, I read this as number 5 was, let's do some stuff specifically to address pass-through. And, people have argued, what if we had a tunnel through the face of Tiger Mountain, which would be an expensive, although perhaps effective solution to that. But, those kinds of things that are, we can do all sorts of stuff to improve internal efficiency that aren't targeted at that pass-through. But we certainly saw a presentation a couple weeks ago that said that pass-through is a sizable and growing fraction of our traffic load. So I'm not, what do people think? I mean, do we need specific language to target pass-through, or can we leave this one as is per the earlier conversation about giving staff sufficient, minimum and sufficient guidance? As is? All right.
In my objective, again, I don't think it has to be wordsmiths. The emphasis should be on pass-through.
Thank you. All right.
Message received, thank you. Growth and.
I'm sorry, Councilmember
So
Goodman.
I can go back to the one we had before. I think my issue with what's there is the sentence structure is different than what we have. So it would be, you either start it with there are improved connections and efficiencies in the mobility system. That at least is, and I know that's, sorry, I'm about the language.
You want the deriving verb to be a be, not an active verb.
Good catch. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, the growth and development goal had slight change. Growth is proactively managed, planned, and communicated in a responsible way that retains our strong sense of community and livability. Objectives, edits to each of those. Neighborhoods have retained their charm and have a distinctive character, pattern, and setting, which includes both built and natural environments. The community shapes plans that guide future growth and understands their connections to current development. And across the city, there are a variety of public amenities, housing types, and services that contribute to a livable community. These are all a little easier to process than the earlier versions. I thought these were good edits.
Comments? Suggestions? Thoughts? Councilmember Ray.
I have a nit. On number 1, it's past tense, and the others are all present tense. And we could change that to say neighborhoods retain their charm instead of have retained their charm.
That seems
Channeling my
reasonable.
inner council member Goodman.
I don't see anyone rapidly moving toward their microphones to provide a counterpoint, so let's go with that. Thank you. Anything else on this page? All right.
Cool. Environment and stewardship, the goal stays the same. Environmental resources are proactively enhanced, protected, and stewarded. A couple of minor edits to the objectives. Environmental resources are improved and degradation is prevented with consistent, responsible, and sustainable planning. The city has committed to environmental stewardship and has aligned practices, policies, and staff culture and training. Community members are engaged, educated, and informed stewards of Issaquah's environment. And new strategic land acquisitions for park, trail, open space, critical areas, and natural resource protection are available for the benefit of the community.
See some smiles even.
Moving
Right.
forward.
Let's move forward.
All right. Social and economic vitality, you gave us a talking to at your last meeting about the absence of specificity on these objectives, so we did some work on it. The goal stays the same. An economically vital and diverse community is supported by robust businesses, affordable housing, and supportive services. 4 objectives. There is an increase in local living wage jobs from a diverse mix of businesses. 2, there is an increase in low-income, special needs, and workforce housing, so more individuals and families can live and work in the community. 3, access to targeted services and resources is improved to reduce inequities in health and well-being in the community. And 4, there is an increase in the new and existing businesses that choose to locate and expand in Issaquah. These are much more specific than what we were last time. I think they're actually pretty strong. I think it's a good piece of work.
Yeah, I just want to say this was the, this kind of, we're going to measure it, we're going to make changes, we're going to measure how those changes impact these areas, I think is great. And this is one of the areas, it's why I wanted to ask about actions and performance measures, because I'm itching to see where we go with this. These are all at the high level what I was hoping to see, and then the proof will be in the pudding on the specific actions and performance measures. But this to me is the high level guidance for what those should be. Councilmember Goodman.
So the second one, there is an increase in low-income special needs and workforce housing, so more individuals and families can live and work in the area. What we had before, housing opportunities are available across the income spectrum, so individuals and families to live and work in the community. So what concerns me about this one is that we call out low-income special needs and then workforce housing, which lacks a definition. And I've just kind of been looking it up a little bit, and I think it means different things to different communities. So I think what I like about potentially a mix of the two would be something along the lines of sort of the first one, housing opportunities are available across the income spectrum. I think that's pretty broad. So more individuals and families can afford to live and work in the community. And then that covers all of those. Because I think we can get hung up on not only the definition of workforce housing, but workforce housing also, as I've been reading, has a little bit to do with where you locate the housing, near employment centers and job centers. I'm not sure we're a big enough community that we need to worry about that. But anyway, I would propose that as a potential discussion point. Housing opportunities are available across the income spectrum, so more individuals and families can afford to live and work in the community.
So before Councilmember Hunt, I'm not opposed to the idea of reframing it the way you're talking about. I just want to make sure that more, or, you know, whatever the language is, that there are going to be increases in this, that we're going to measure it, you know, the housing stock, as you say, across the income spectrum, and that at the end of this process, we're going to have more than we have today.
Yeah, so I said more.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm just plus
Yeah.
oneing on the more,
Yeah, and so,
that the more is critical. Councilmember Hunt.
I had a little bit, oops. I had a little bit of a different concern about this one, which is that it's talking about so more individuals and families can live and work in the community. I think having it be that so more individuals can afford partly addresses that, but my concern was that there are individuals and families living and working in the community currently, so it's not a more question, it's a question about individuals that live in the community and meeting their needs. And so I had a slightly different wording, which is that housing increasingly meets the needs of the community, including increasing availability of workforce housing and housing for low-income individuals and those with special needs.
So how would we word that in conjunction with Councilmember Goodman's suggestion? What was the beginning of that again?
can you read it?
I can reread it again. Housing increasingly meets the needs of the community, including increasing availability of workforce housing and housing for low-income individuals and those with special needs.
So I think the first half of that sentence, we use that, and then the second half, we use the language that Councilmember Goodman suggested. What would that look like? Brian?
Like mine because it's shorter. I was kidding.
So I heard the big edit here was housing increasingly meets the needs of those living and working in Issaquah was the big edit, as opposed to more housing opportunities are available so more people can live here. It was
What I'm
about
saying is
in meeting the needs was the,
Yeah, I mean, what I'm suggesting is housing increasingly meets the needs of the community by something income spectrum, right? I'm not sure exactly how those get bolted together. It increasingly covers the needs of the community through not sure exactly.
increasingly meets the needs of individuals and families living and working in Issaquah.
Yeah, but I think income spectrum is important in the second half of the sentence. I think the first half of the sentence is great, but the second half, moving from this language of low income and workforce housing towards something about across the income spectrum.
So housing increasingly meets the needs of the community, of those, of individuals and families living and working in the community across the income spectrum. I don't think I have income spectrum quite in the right spot in the community, in this sentence, but.
Good. Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. When I read this, my assumption is the attempt is to call out that most of the available housing of it today is not affordable to many of the people who work here. And so it's trying to address that gap in particular, that it's difficult for many of people who work here in retail, for example, to live in proximity where they work. So this, I never read this as full spectrum. I read this one as, we have a lot of jobs that aren't in the high-paying class, but the amount that they do pay, if households are dependent upon those jobs, there's not much housing here that those type of households can afford. But I thought this was really targeting, as it says here, and this is one way of doing it, low-income special needs, workforce housing. I think this is really targeting people who want to live in proximity to their jobs here in Issaquah, and many of those jobs don't pay, are not high-paying jobs. So I didn't see this as the full spectrum objective.
That would be an argument in keeping it with the current language. is what
Well,
Actually, doesn't housing increasingly meets the needs of individuals and families living and working in the community or in Issaquah? Doesn't that do it?
What do people think?
No, because it doesn't address, I think we're talking about more housing that's more affordable. I don't think that gets at, I think the point of that is that we're trying to make it so people can afford to live here and work here, like Paul said.
But doesn't that say that?
Housing, no, because it doesn't talk about income spectrums. I mean, I don't think we're concerned about the people who can afford the expensive houses here. And that's,
Or you could say-
that's talking about everybody.
Needs of more of the families or all of the families, that individuals and families.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
I agree. I feel like, as we were talking that through, having that income spectrum across the income spectrum is really critical. But I think that there is a way to add that to the language.
How about
How about if you
individuals and
just put
families
it at the
across the
end?
income spectrum?
Just append it to the end.
Or I was sort of saying in the middle, but
Then you have to have afford in there. It's not trying to get better for people who don't have trouble affording to live here. And then,
How about
Well, so-
housing increasingly meets the needs of individuals and families across the income spectrum who live and work in Issaquah?
and then my other nit about it is increasingly, because the strategic plan is we're supposed to get to a state of being. So it should be housing meets the needs of individuals and families, rather not increasingly. This is because we're trying to get to a state, a vision.
Or it could be just better, housing better meets the needs, if you're trying to show, I mean, I hear your point, it could be, if you want to show different than today, you can.
so my original concern with how it was originally worded, housing opportunities are available across the income spectrum for individuals and families who live and work in the community. And my concern with that was, what if somebody just said, great, we're already there? And I come back with, I don't think we are. So it's, again, this comes back to the question of how to give guidance to staff on what we work on over the next 5
Well, and I think the point there wasn't that it shouldn't increase, but that it shouldn't forever increase. It should get to a good state. So you could just say, housing better meets the needs of individuals, families, and families across the income spectrum who live and work in Issaquah.
Exactly the word I was thinking of when you were talking.
All right. So I want to write that down, and then Councilman Winterstein?
Well, he's writing in better, and I wish he would write in right there the word affordability, housing affordability. What we're talking about is housing
Sure,
affordability
that's
for
fine.
more people trying to work here, who work in the jobs here in town.
Yeah, I like that.
So it's
That's
the
good.
housing affordability
Sure.
meets the needs of individuals and families who work here.
Sure. It's the obverse of housing burden, right? It's you want
Right,
burden
yes.
to drop
Right, I
down
wanna
and
drop the
affordability
burden.
up.
Right. I want the
Housing
accessible.
affordability better meets the needs of individuals and families across the income spectrum who live and work in Issaquah. I'm seeing, looks like enthusiasm. All right, thank you. It's involved, but I'm glad that this was a really important one. City Administrator Moon, do you have any, you're good? I see a thumbs up. All right.
Moving on to the next goal.
Councilmember Goodman.
Number 3, what does targeted mean?
So I think this was trying to be more specific. That's not, I think previously it talked about a range of services, and so this is being a little bit more intentional to some of the things that were identified as needs, for example, in the community needs assessment. So there's certain services which would be more beneficial to provide in the community without specifying every single one.
So does it hurt anything or targeted out?
Not necessarily.
Councilmember Ray, then Deputy Council President.
I actually think it reads cleaner without targeted, because targeted is kind of a little bit ambiguous. And if I just cross it out, it works better for me.
Council Deputy President. Peace.
So actually, as we talk about the needs assessment and that kind of thing, I actually like the word targeted, but I think that if we could, if we don't like targeted here in the objective, if we can boil it down to what those targeted needs are as we get a little bit further into this, then I would be okay with that.
Councilmember Winterstein.
I think we're bantering around the word, a really good word. We're talking about needs assessment. How about access to needed services? Access to needed services and resources. That was part of David's answer. Came from the needs assessment.
Be okay. I'd be okay with needed.
How do people feel about replacing the word targeted with needed? All right, well. Going once.
I mean, I don't like it, but it's because it's just another, just raises the question again, what kind of services are needed? I would prefer that we get down to the action steps, and when we decide what those are, and when we are deciding on the priorities later, then we tie the needs assessment to the action steps that come out of this. And that tells us what. But I might just.
So, Councilmember Ramos?
Yeah, how about replace targeted with human? So human services, that's not here, that's what we're looking at.
Well, now we have had several suggested adjectives, and what I'm going to say if I stand back at 10,000 feet and try to put maybe everything I've heard together is just not have an adjective in there for right now. Because I've heard 3 different potential adjectives, and I haven't necessarily heard that any of those 3 have caught on. So I'm going to say that probably the sense of the body is that we not have an adjective. Sorry to all 3 of you who have suggested adjectives.
So you're suggesting.
Feel free to push back.
You're suggesting access to services and resources is improved to reduce inequities in health and well-being in the community.
That's what I'm suggesting, but please, Councilmember Winterstein?
That's fine, and put the priority on needed services.
Thank you.
Let me type.
Council Deputy President?
I'm on to the next.
The human
Councilor
services
Goodman.
one I was just going to respond to, that doesn't necessarily capture grocery stores and stuff like that.
Right. Council Deputy President?
So if it's okay to move on to number 4, sort of a small word that I feel like is important that needs to be added is the word plan. there is a plan to increase new and existing businesses that choose to locate or expand in Issaquah. I think the reason why is because we can all be super hopeful that that happens, but without, I think it's going to take a fair amount of planning to bring that to fruition, so.
So there is
just-
there is a plan to increase new and existing businesses?
Yes.
Councilmember Goodman?
I would think that what we want in this new future state is we want there to be an increase. And one of the action steps could be to create a plan.
That's kind of how I felt about it too. I felt like it would be obvious that the first action would be, on several of these, would be to come up with a plan, right? I mean, I definitely agree with Council Deputy President Batiste that we need a plan and it's going to be a challenge. But I sort of feel like that's intrinsic in that when we go to see actions, we'd want to see it. My question is around businesses that choose to locate or expand in Issaquah. So there's been a conversation amongst some of us around sort of strategic employers. And we don't really talk about strategic employers anywhere. So I mean, I'm not a big fan of adding lots of words, but I just wonder, I want to see new and existing businesses locate or expand in Issaquah, but I also, in addition to that, want to see strategic employers expand. I want all big companies in Washington State to be based in Issaquah. Sorry? Okay.
So part of what we love about how this plan is shaping up is that there's so much interplay between. And so you could link 4 and 1 together and you could say, let's focus on those employers that provide those living wage jobs.
Because they sort of by their nature. So you would leave it like this and understand that part of a plan would probably involve
Sure.
strategic employers. Council Deputy President, then Councilmember Winterstein.
Well, I'm going to roll all the way backwards on what I just said. So in regard to strategic employers, if we're going to talk about a plan, then I think that even the strategic employers piece of it would be the next step, because that is a conversation around clustering, around what we want to do and who we want to attract. That's part of the planning for me. So I guess if we're going to leave out the word plan, I would respectfully also leave out the word strategic, because I would want us to have a conversation about what exactly we're focusing on.
Okay. So I think collectively we're suggesting not at the moment making any changes. Councilmember Winterstein.
+1, and I'll add that I don't know what you meant by strategic, but it could be a single sole proprietor and some service, or a small employer of less than 10 employees could be incredibly valuable. So I wouldn't want to exclude by these objectives, create a bias away from achieving an objective and creating an environment where they can thrive here as well.
No, I hear you, and I completely agree. My own personal take is I think we're actually pretty good as a city at engaging small employers, and for instance, having a incubator site on Gilman as an example of that. But I think our record is bad and getting worse on major employers, except for 1 or 2, right? And so we've seen a departure of some major employers over the past few years, and that really, really concerns me. If you look at the list of employers, Keith's scratching his head, if you look at employers who have more than 1,000 employees here, that list has gotten shorter in the last couple of years, right? And that concerns me.
So we're leaving that one stand.
Sounds like it. Any other? Nope. That's the sense of the body.
Okay, core infrastructure, a couple of strategic edits. To the goal, a well-planned, designed, built, and maintained infrastructure system supports current and future community members. And the objectives, just 2 objectives. The first one the same. Resources are in place to operate and maintain new and existing infrastructure throughout its life cycle. And the second one, adding sustainable and resilient. So it says infrastructure is planned and prepared for future growth in central Issaquah, leveraging development and incorporating innovative, sustainable, and resilient design. Added specificity, and the goal is actually more robust.
Councilmember Winterstein.
One word difference, the handout and the electronic and printed form, in the goal, the last word is needs. Up there, it says members.
Members is from version 1.
Oh. Good catch. So, what we meant to say, a well-planned, designed, built, and maintained infrastructure system supports current and future community needs.
Councilmember Ray.
This is just a question of clarification. When we say infrastructure, what are we specifically talking about?
David, do you want to field that one?
Sure. So we are talking about all forms of infrastructure, so water, sewer, streets, et cetera. And so the distinction between this one when it comes to transportation and this piece is this is more focused on the current infrastructure that's in the ground, at least for that first objective. And the second piece is more about planning for growth as it relates to that context. The mobility has kind of a larger overall piece to it. So.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. I don't have any issue with the goal, but I think it's the way it's worded is a little awkward. I would keep all the words. I think before we talked about the hyphenated. I think that's it's kind of, usually you just have when you hyphenate like that, you just have a couple words. We've got 4, so I would kind of think that maybe should be reworded to say that the infrastructure system is well-designed, well-planned, well-designed, well-built, and well-maintained, and supports current and future community members. I think if you left it like this, I would suggest that it's a well-planned, comma, well-designed, comma, well-built, comma, and well-maintained, and that just is kind of wonky.
Or you could just say, a well-planned, designed, built, and maintained infrastructure system without all those hyphens. And
Because then it's well-planned, and it's also designed, built, and maintained. So I think what we're wanting it to be well in front of all of those. I just would play with it
Okay.
a little bit. That's all.
I see some general support. Anybody have a problem with doing that? So do you understand what the revised language?
we're adding well.
Councilmember Goodman, was it adding 3 wells, or was it the idea of moving the wells to the middle of the sentence, as Brian suggested?
I think Brian and staff can look at it and decide either way. I just think leaving it like that doesn't
I'm
work.
seeing general support for that statement. Go forth and Smith as you see fit. Smith a verb? Can one smith? I think one can. Smithy, right, is someone who smiths.
Okay?
An engineer.
And last one, city leadership and services. The goal is unchanged. Leadership and accountability is provided in the delivery of public services for our growing and diversifying community. And a couple of edits to the objectives. The city is actively fostering meaningful, inclusive, and diverse civic engagement for all. Excuse me. A collaborative work environment empowers employees, drives innovation, and sustains the city as a high-performing organization. Issaquah is an equitable and welcoming community that embraces and celebrates diversity. And the city provides clear, transparent, and sustainable financial management of public resources. Again, I thought these were good edits that cleared up language.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Can I ask staff what, number 1, the meaning of diverse civic engagement, meaningful, inclusive, and diverse civic engagement? Could you please discuss?
Sure. So I believe in that context, it means a variety of civic engagements. So there's not just one method. There's a variety of methods that will meet the needs of the people we're trying to engage with where they're at.
Because the word diversity is used later, and I think that has a very specific context.
You could use
that a
multifaceted in
different
that spot.
use, a synonym for diverse up front might be better.
Multifaceted might work in that.
Or he said
location.
variety.
Or varied.
Yeah.
Varied. Would varied be, work for you?
I right-click on words, look at the list, choose synonyms, and pick one out of the list. That seems to
So you're
work.
trusting Brian and his staff to come up with a synonym for diverse, is what you're
No,
saying?
clearly not that.
Councilmember Ray.
On number 2, I find this one a little limiting. It basically says the collaborative work environment makes all these things happen. And I think I would like to suggest a broader objective for number 2, which is the city has a collaborative work environment, empowers employees, drives innovation, and is a high-performing organization. So instead of making a collaborative work environment the
Does all those
predecessor
other
to
things.
everything, it is a element of a more inclusive list.
How do people feel about that? Not seeing any disagreement on that? All right. Sounds like sense of the body is yes.
Can you say it back to me? I was getting down varied.
The city has a collaborative work environment, empowers employees, drives innovation, and is a high-performing organization.
But I'm still not seeing any dyspeptic. Reactions. All right. Further thoughts and comments on this slide? Nope. Anything that people want to, because that's our last slide, right?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Councilmember Hunt.
On the last thing, Objective 4, the city provides clear, transparent, and sustainable financial management of public resources. I wonder if it might be cleaner to just say the city's financial management process is clear, transparent, and sustainable. The wording that they're providing a financial resource management seems, it seems confusing to me the first time I read it, and it seems like it's about the budgeting process and being clear and transparent and sustainable in the way the city budgets.
So let me ask City Administrator Moon and Director Fujimoto if they have any thoughts about whether that change, any thoughts on that? Because since it's really about how you folks run the city.
I was just looking to David to see if he could remind me of the origination story on this and what the intent was. Was it on process? Was it on the management? And I'm trying to see if we have anything that helps to identify that. Do you?
So this one was originally more specifically focused on financial management and kind of the prudence thereof. And so I think what we were trying to say is, as kind of an outcome statement, if that's true, then you could make this statement that says the city does in fact provide clear, transparent, and sustainable financial resource management, essentially. So it was, that's the reason why it's stated as such, rather than as in kind of action, so.
So would the proposed language in any way make, diffuse, or is there any?
Can you restate what that was?
The city's financial management system is clear, transparent, and sustainable.
I think the only difference is that the financial management system could be implied to be a specific thing, like the munis system, as opposed to the overall management of the financials.
So you would request that we consider keeping the language as is?
Yes, or some slight modification thereof.
So Member Hunt, what do you think?
I
could
think
be-
it is better than originally, so originally I had a concern about the city provides financial resource management, which I think was the original wording, and it does clarify that it's about the city's own financial management. And so I think it is an improvement. I was suggesting wording that made it clearer for me that we were talking about the city's financial management. And
Certainly, and maybe
is clear
as
and transparent.
Emily suggested, dropping system from the statement, and then it kind of removes that kind of focus on a thing.
Yeah, I actually had process in my edit, but I wonder if we could even just say city's financial management is clear, transparent, and sustainable.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Kind of like the phrase of public resources, the city's financial management of public resources is. I do like naming that.
Could be just the city's management of public resources is clear, transparent, and sustainable.
That seems like a step away from
That's
the.
broader.
Financial, I think you still need the word finance.
Okay,
Yeah.
This is
so the
about
city's
budget.
financial management of public resources
Resources.
is clear, sustainable, and transparent.
Very transparent.
Looks like so that is the sense of the body. Any other thoughts on this slide? So before we go to Brian's next slide, does anybody want to revisit anything that we talked about earlier? Okay. I could never do what Brian does because my writing quickly like this while everybody's sitting around waiting for it is a horrible scrawl that would be completely illegible to anyone other than. So kudos.
Okay, I think we're through all of them then. So that brings us to next steps, just sort of what to expect next is staff work groups continue going, and now they're working on actions and performance measures, which it's clear to me you're all eager to see. Continue checking in with the community and having sort of input through peak democracy, and be back here since we're done with this today. We'll be back here in December for a council review of those next steps. So.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, and since we have the time, I would like to, just real quickly, this was we just have, was not with your current materials, but this was from the slide from the last presentation, just about the overall timeline for the strategic plan. And as we start to dial into the conversation around how do we implement and how do we use the strategic plan, per Councilmember Ray's comments earlier. So a couple of pieces, and again, I apologize, I need to get this so it is more easily readable. But we're at the stage right now where we're focused on goals and objectives. As Brian had mentioned, we'll be moving to actions and performance measures and then going into a draft plan into that first quarter of next year. Concurrently, as has been discussed, we'll start to have those early conversations about budget, thinking towards 2020 and the implementation of the strategic plan. It's envisioned that as we start to go into that process, we'll be wanting to have a conversation with council about early planning retreat that can help to set some direction and guidance for us as we start to think about the implementation of the strategic plan. Another piece is also that we are planning to do a process where we would be reporting out to the community on progress and then kind of taking in some of that feedback and using it to adjust. Some of those things are better implemented in subsequent years as we start to move into actual implementation. But we'll want to be keeping in mind kind of those various touch points and how do we share that information out to the community as well. So that's another piece of that consideration, both in terms of the work with City Council and a planning retreat. The other piece related to that is we have in the budget, I believe, proposed for next year a citizen survey. It's something that we've typically done on an every other year basis. So that's another point of feedback, can be linked to some of the performance measures as we start to go forward. So we'll start to see those pieces be integrated as well. And then finally, as Brian had mentioned, how do we shape this up into a strategic work plan so that we can articulate which are the pieces that are going forward and understanding what our commitments are for each individual year. So we'll start to dial up some of those pieces in our next conversation. Also want to start talking about things like criteria for priorities and how do we think about, how do we make decisions about these various pieces as they start to come forward, because there is a lot. There are 6 different goal areas times 2 to 5 objectives, and then a handful of actions with each. So that's a very large number of items. So we'll want to be thinking, how do we actually prioritize some of those actions going forward as well? So that's a little preview, I think, of coming attractions, if you will. And I think that's it, unless there's any questions.
I want to have a quick conversation about one of the things you've got there. So under actions, performance measures, you've got December/January work session. So I just want to make sure, I don't think this is not time sensitive per se, right? So I just want to make sure everybody is good with the idea that I'm a little bit nervous about how hopefully December will play out well, because we will be done with the budget nice and early, and we won't go late. But I sort of want to throw out there and see if anybody violently opposes the idea that depending on how busy we get in December with budget, and if budget should go longer than we think, that we would be cool with moving this out to January. I don't see any strong opposition to that. I just wanted to make sure that nobody has their heart set on seeing this in December. I mean, obviously we will want to do it in December, but I just, December has a way around here of sometimes getting really crowded.
Getting quite busy.
So that second meeting in December could.
And we can lay out what that looks like in terms of timing. It's important that there's some drafting that needs to occur in here, some internal review. We have about a month of pretty broad community engagement with the draft plan anticipated, and a couple of touch points with the overall package draft plan for City Council. And that, believe it or not, that does take us all the way out through April to early May for adoption. So if we start to push things out, that will have the place we'll start to bump up against is budget direction to staff for the following year. So
I just don't want to see a 7-hour,
Yes.
December, whatever it is, 17th council meeting. It's very festive. Any other questions or comments right now? City Administrator Moon, anything, any closing thoughts for us? All right, well, then with that, no other comments. We are adjourned from the 5 o'clock council committee work session, and a reminder that we will be starting the regular city council meeting at 7 p.m., which is in 43 minutes. Thank you.